Welcome back to the Small Business Show. I'm your host, Lori Brooks. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. This week, I have the pleasure of chatting with Blue Melnick. He runs Sage Event Management with his wife, Barry Baumgardner. Sage specializes in helping speakers, authors, and influencers leverage both the live and virtual event platform to launch a seven-figure coaching business in 3 days or less. Blue, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm super excited to have you and to dive into your journey and where you are today with your practice. But before we do, I want to rewind the clock just a bit. I want to go back to the days of, say, junior high or high school. Think about a time when an aunt or an uncle or even a mentor at school or counselor would ask you what it is you wanted to be when you grow up. Blue, what was your response to that question back then?
I didn't, and I think I didn't know because I really didn't like school. School was not for me, and not most kids don't like school. I don't think that's anything new or earth shattering. But I went to college for 2 years and to two different colleges, and in those 2 years, I amassed a total of 1 credit. So it just really wasn't for me. And I was trying to figure myself out. And in the end, I found that I was fairly decent at using skills that I had to make money. And I didn't know at the time, but that was basically an entrepreneur. And this was true from a very young age. When I was 13 years old, I wanted a mountain bike. A really nice mountain bike. It was like at the time, because this is like, I don't know, 100 years ago, it was a $1,300 Cannondale mountain bike. And I was like, I really want this mountain bike. And my parents thought I was crazy. And they were like, no, if you want that, save your money. You can buy it yourself. And this is my first foray into entrepreneurship. I was in a ski town growing up on weekends, and I learned how to tune skis by hand. And I got all of my parents' friends to give me their skis on Sunday night, and they would get them back on Friday night so that they could use them the next weekend. But I would basically tune their skis by hand during the week. And over the course of, the 2.5, 3 months that is the winter ski season in Collingwood, Ontario, where I grew up, I earned the money to, in April, buy myself a brand new Cannondale mountain bike. And that was kind of my first foray into entrepreneurship. So when people said, what do you want to do? Like what classes, what direction do you want to go? My thought always was, I just want to make money. I don't know what I want to do. I just want to make money.
I love that. And you know what? It's funny. And it's so true of most entrepreneurs. A lot of entrepreneurs who kind of have that bug early on in life, that's really what it's derived from. It's derived from that interest or desire for something that might be just beyond your reach without putting in that extra effort. And that extra effort is what kind of launches that part. And believe it or not, you just dug back to 13, even though originally we started in college where you were saying, I didn't know about, but you did. You did before you even recognized that you did. And that's the funniest part. A lot of us have this entrepreneurial bug that we don't recognize was there long before the journey started. And I love how you explained, you went through 2 years of college and did the 1 credit. And, I always say my audience is so tired. I know my daughter's tired of this phrase more so than anything else, but I say that there's no such thing as failure. There's only feedback. And I can guarantee that during those 2 years with 1 credit, you learned a whole lot more about yourself than you thought you could have during that period of time.
I did some good, some less good. I did learn a lot about myself, and I realized the 2 years before I went to college, I had started learning how to build websites, early rudimentary websites, nothing like what, people can do today, obviously, because again, we're talking almost 30 years ago. And I had partnered with a buddy of mine who was like the consummate salesperson. And he had an older brother, and the two of them sold a bunch of companies on us building a website for them. And I then did that. And I realized before I even went to college, I was making more money than, some of my parents' friends. It's like, why am I going to college? Why am I doing this?
Right.
I mean, I just want to keep doing that because, if I don't doing that, I have the money to do the stuff I really want to do. But the moment I go to college, two things start happening. Number one, I'm not making money anymore. And number two, I'm not really doing something I like doing because I don't like to study. So anyway, I think it is a fantastic journey for some to go through college, but it just wasn't for me.
I understand completely. And I'm curious what you feel was the push for you. What do you feel like was that wake up call for you at that point when you said, you know what, that's it. It is time to make a change. What was that step? What was that catalyst for you?
Well, it was less of a choice and more of a option that was given to me. I say I went to two schools over the course of 2 years because the first school wouldn't have me for the second year and the second school wouldn't have me for the third year. And I was like, well, thank goodness, because I'm not really sure why I would really want to go back anyway. So at that point, it was like, I need to figure something out. And I went and I actually got a job, which was the first time I had gotten a real job pretty much ever. And, I got promoted a couple of times in like 9 months. And by month 10, I was bored and I went and started my own business.
I absolutely adore that. You started in school. You decided, you know what? School's not it. This isn't working for me. End of story. Let's move on. You went out and you got a job because that's what we're told to do. And that is how most people go about generating their income on a day-to-day basis. And especially in our generation, that's what we were taught to do. Whether we liked it or not, that's what we were raised to think that was the next step in our journey. You finish school, you get a job. End of story. But
and that's exactly what happened to me. I finished school,
right.
Admittedly, not the way most people finish it. And I went and got a job.
There you go. Exactly. That's the way the journey goes for a lot of people. So you decided, okay, 10 months. I first of all, I want to give you kudos for 10 months and making that decision, because there are so many of us that stay in soul crushing positions for years and years and years, debating and deciding. And you have no idea how many episodes I've done, Blue, where people are like, I wish I had just started sooner. I wish I had just made that decision. So I kudos to you for taking those 10 months and deciding that's it. I'm doing this. So you started your own business. What do you feel helped to keep you motivated, as it can be really difficult to do throughout the entrepreneurial journey? There's pitfalls, there's highs and lows. We can admit that it was clearly the path that was going to work for you. It was clearly the path that was fitting the lifestyle and the journey that you wanted to see. But what do you feel it was that really kept you motivated to continue down that journey?
Well, so it's really interesting. Up until the company that I run today with my wife, I never really saw myself as a business owner. I was, but I didn't really see myself that way. How I saw myself was just as a person who was taking on tasks and projects to make money. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know that in the end, that's actually a business owner, but at every step of the way, it was like, okay, I need to do something new, because I still have bills, right? You have rent, you have a lease payment on a vehicle, whatever your monthly nut is that you have to crack. So I have to figure out how to make sure that I generate at least that much money in order to survive. And then, of course, you want a little bit of playtime, right? Because it's not all just about work. So it was always just, all right, what's the next project? What's the next project? What's the next thing? And then eventually what started to happen is those projects became the same, right? And now for me, that's when I started to have a business. Like I went and all of a sudden every project was, I'm now filming events. And that becomes this little, that's when I started to maybe think about myself as a business, but it was still just me. I didn't have any employees. And then it went from that to my wife and I, well, the lady who's my wife now, she was running an event management company. She actually did have a business. She had, in my mind, she had a business because she had employees and, many clients and so on and so forth. And I didn't really see myself as having a business, even though I had lots of clients, but we had a lot of similar clients. And we wound up combining our businesses. And that's when I started to think of myself as a business owner. It took quite some time before that really actually shifted. But for me, the change from starting to think of myself as a business owner, as opposed to just a guy who's making money, to get by, even though getting by means something different to everybody, was probably when I started having employees.
I love how you explain that evolution of what you feel was the start for you. Even though, like you said, there was so many other entrepreneurial moments that you had prior to calling yourself a business owner. There's a lot of people who do the one-off gigs. Gig workers is what they're calling it, the gig economy and so forth. And I think that's the wrong way to go about classifying yourself, because much like you said, it's so much more difficult to take on the mindset of a business owner if you just consider yourself to be in the gig economy. So that's something that I really wish would change, but whatever, that I think that's just me being elderly too.
I don't think you're wrong. I think the reality is what I had was a gig economy lifestyle before that was even a thing, right? Because now it's so much easier to get gigs, whether it's, checking out on Craigslist and being able to get a job almost at the drop of a hat. Like if I was starting again, life would be a lot easier today in that gig economy than it was when I was entrepreneurial. So.
No, definitely. I do understand where you're coming from in that respect. The times have changed. There's numerous platforms out there that you can just go ahead, set up a profile and begin taking on gigs at any point in time. So it definitely has changed and evolved quite a bit. But I still feel like those that classify themselves as being part of the gig economy may have some preconceived notion that there's more to being a business owner and don't take on the full mindset or the full ownership of where that journey could possibly take them. So I love how you explained that there was that partnership, that joining of clients and the meshing of the business that really kind of made you recognize, hey, I am a business owner. I am not just making money. This is something that has taken on some shape and some form. So tell us all about your practice, where you are now with a company and the filming of the live events. I'm super excited for you to kind of share a little bit about the process that you take on with your clients as well.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Our business has, like so many businesses, especially businesses in the entertainment and event space, changed so dramatically over the course of the last 2.5 years. Because in March of 2020, when a national emergency was declared and COVID became something that everybody was aware of and you couldn't leave your home, our business essentially ceased to exist, right? Or had the very real potential to, because what we did for our clients day in and day out was produce events for them, produce live in-person events. And when you can't do that anymore and you have, 12 full-time employees, those resources meaning money get drained incredibly fast. Mm-hmm. So we had a really quick decision that we had to make at that time. And I go back to 2.5 years ago because it defines where we are today. And what took place over the course of 2.5 years, we had this idea, which kind of harkened back to my video production days, to produce a virtual event for a client in a different way, in a way that hadn't been done before. Because up until that point, a virtual event was just a live stream, right? And, you could watch what was taking place, but really what was happening if you were at home, you were watching other people have an experience. You weren't actually having one yourself with everybody else. And we wanted to shift that. And we had this crazy idea to, put somebody on a real stage and set up televisions in front of them and take attendees and funnel them into Zoom so that the host could see those attendees and that the attendees could then see each other, much like you and I can see each other right now, and then interact and teach and truly try and create an immersive digital experience for an at-home audience. And we found, our first virtual event took place April 3rd through the 5th, which was, 2.5 weeks after a national emergency was declared. And that event, the majority of the events that we do are revenue generating events for our clients, right? They use them to sell a coaching program or some sort of high ticket offer. And previously, this client had, with his in-person event the year prior, they generated about $600,000 in revenue from the event, which was awesome. And they had, this time around, they had a 20% increase going digitally. They had a 20% increase in gross revenue, in part because when they went digitally, their audience went from 300 people in person to 1,200 people virtually. So they had a greater reach and greater impact in a very, very short period of time because of going with a virtual audience. They had a 20% increase in gross revenue. So the math on that is $720,000. But more importantly, their net went up by almost 50% year over year. And we kind of thought to ourselves, I think we may have something here. This was a much better experience than even we could have possibly imagined. And that first client led to the next client, which had a very similar experience, although his jump in revenue was much higher than the first one. And that led to the next event. And that event led to a gentleman by the name of Tony Robbins walking into our studio to figure out what we were doing. Because one of our clients, Dean Graziosi, who's a great friend and a client of ours, is partners with Tony, called Tony and said, you got to see what Barry and Blue are doing in Charlotte, North Carolina, because that's where the studio was at the time. Because Tony's business was essentially, much like everybody else in this space who produces live events, was shut down. And he walked into this little studio that we had created in the back of a warehouse that had done so far, from the 3 events that we had produced, we had generated about $14 million in revenue, which was just insane. And he was supposed to be there for about a half an hour, wound up being there for 4.5 hours. And we conceptualized what was eventually to become his virtual stadium for his first virtual Unleash the Power Within. So if you know Tony Robbins, that's his signature event. And that event had over 21,000 people in attendance, which was one of the biggest events they had ever done before. And the results that we got from that event, as well as every other virtual event that we've been doing, oftentimes what our attendees are saying is, this is the best event I've ever been to. And when they say that, what's interesting, there's a very, 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 very important word missing when they say this is the best event I've ever been to. They're not saying this is the best virtual event I've ever been to. They're saying this is the best event I've ever been to, because the relationship that they're creating with the host and with the other attendees through Zoom is making it such that they are meeting more people, they are interacting with more people, and they are having a better experience because they're in their own home rather than a weird hotel, having had to fly there, especially right now. That's not fun. So it was just a magical shift. And 2020 wound up being the best year we'd ever had in business. And not by a little, by 7 times better. The year prior was our best year up until that point. The next year, we 7x'd our business. The year after that, we doubled our business from the 7x, right? So in 2 years from mastering this virtual event structure, we essentially completely transformed our business. We transformed our life. We transformed the business of our clients, because almost every single one of them had the best year they've ever had on the backs of virtual events through a pandemic, through a worldwide pandemic that no longer allowed live events to take place. Our little event company, generated over $600 million in revenue for our clients, and had over 750,000 attendees come through our virtual doors, and had almost every single one of our clients have their best year ever. Which,
congratulations.
It was wild. Had you asked me in March of 2020, what does the next 2 years hold? In my wildest dreams, I couldn't have defined what took place. I wouldn't have even been close.
Okay, so you got to tell me, what was the catalyst for you? Of course, COVID was the catalyst for the change over to virtual. But what do you feel like it was in those 2.5 weeks that made you just immediately make that shift?
So the biggest thing that we did that was different than what everybody else was doing is we thought about it from the host's perspective first, right? And I said to Barry, because I understand speakers, right? And so does Barry. And we said, Barry's my wife. And we said to each other, what's the thing that's most important over the course of 3 days? And the attendee experience is very important, but what's actually more important is the host's experience and connection to the audience. If we've all been in a ballroom where at some point a speaker gets on stage and they just don't connect and it's a flop, right? And it's painful to watch. It's painful to experience. It's probably painful to be on stage in that moment as well. And we said, we need to create an environment for our hosts, for our speakers, that after 3 days, they don't feel like poking their eyes out with a spoon, right? So because we came at it from their perspective first, they showed up in a way that brought the energy from the attendees, and that circular release of energy and return of energy, because it's really a flow. It's a give and take. If you've ever spoken on stage, not just you, but your listeners and our watchers, if you've ever spoken on stage, you show up differently when the audience reacts positively to you, right? When they applaud when you come on stage, when they laugh when you tell something, an amusing story or anecdote, when they, whatever they do, when they react audibly and visibly, you show up different. But if you walk on stage and it's a dead audience, right? And they just don't, doesn't matter how funny or how good you are, they just don't do anything. You don't show up as your best self. And there's nothing that can change that, because that feedback that you get from an audience is so important. So by creating a stage where the host could feel the audience, could see the audience, could interact with the audience verbally, not just in chat, but actually talk with anybody they want to. Look at a wall of 700 people and say, I want to talk to that person right there. It was really a game changer. That one decision to host these events inside of Zoom is probably the one decision that changed everything.
I love how you explain that. And I love how you kind of touched on it, but brushed over the change in the energy. Because that truly, I feel, was the catalyst for you.
Yep.
It went from you creating to create cash flow to cover to you focusing on how the clients were truly going to benefit.
Yep.
The energy change of what you were focused on shifted over and exponentially changed things. And I think oftentimes we neglect to pull that piece out of our journey to focus on where that change was, what it was that did it for us. And so I try to make sure that we all notice those moments because they're more important than we think. they're a lot more important than we give credit for. The change in our focus, that direction of our focus can sometimes be the slightest change, but it can be the biggest difference overall. So I truly thank you for sharing that with us. Definitely. If you had the chance to go back, say 10, 15 years and tell yourself just one thing, long before the pandemic hit, long before you really started taking off in your practice, what do you feel like you would tell yourself if you had the chance to tell yourself just one thing?
That's a great question. If I had the opportunity to tell myself one thing, and I'll just go back 10 years. My wife and I had a live event business and things were going well. But if I could tell myself one thing, it would be try to figure out virtual sooner, right? Because we were forced into it because of COVID, and that force, required the change to take place. But had we sat down and given some thought to this 10 years ago, I mean, I can just only imagine where we would be today. Because right now, today, these virtual events, we are for the most part out of the pandemic. COVID is still a thing for many people, but for the most part, at least in the United States, North America, and for much of Europe, the world is living its life, right? We're living with COVID rather than living in fear of it. Mm-hmm. And, that's in large part due to so many different things, not the least of which is vaccinations and all sorts of other stuff, right? And the new variants or whatever. We don't have to get into that. But virtual events are still outperforming in-person events by a long shot. Mm-hmm. Now that people have a taste of what's possible, not just hosts, but attendees, like, you mean I can sit at home and have this amazing experience, but still have dinner with my kids, not have to, eat cruddy takeout food or bad room service. I can actually get the transformation from attending a Tony Robbins event without actually having to be there. That's amazing, right? And what I also think is really cool about that, just in general, is we're not just affecting the lives of our attendees, but when I look out at our attendees who are sitting there watching, the amount of people who are sitting there with a family member who are also getting to experience this, that would not have happened in person, right? Because you double your costs, you double your childcare costs, everything, all of that stuff.
Travel
changes.
Expenses, everything.
For sure. Right. So watching the impact and the reach that we now have with virtual is just so amazing to me. And we could have done this 10 years ago. So if I could tell myself one thing, it would be to not give up on the in-person or on the virtual experience. And honestly, try harder to get there. So, because I know we could have done it. None of the stuff that we're doing today is earth-shatteringly different than what we could have done 10 years ago. A lot of the technology is still the same. A lot of the technology existed. Yes, it's evolved, but it existed. We could have done this.
Mhm.
So that's really it.
Remember I told you how many guests I've spoken to who said, start sooner. If I could have rewound the clock and started this sooner or had that thought process just a couple of minutes sooner, I don't know where life would be. So yeah,
Yeah.
hopefully that is part of what the show is truly doing for our viewers, is really hopefully providing a way for them to spark that idea in an industry that they may not have been thinking of. And really, truly, this is the first time we've had anyone on the show who produces and hosts live events as a real game changing piece of their business, not, just something that they do, but really the practice of their business. So I thank you so much for sharing with us all that you've done, all that you've created and your journey. But if you have the opportunity to change anything at all right now in your business, if you could wave a magic wand and, abracadabra and make that change, what do you feel like that change would be for you?
That's an interesting question. And it's an interesting question because we're in the midst of so much change right now. We made the decision in late 2021 to move from Murrells Inlet, where our studio was and where we lived. And that's Murrells Inlet is just south of Myrtle Beach on the coast in South Carolina. And we decided to make the move south about 90 minutes down the coast to Charleston, South Carolina. And in moving to Charleston, there's a lot of things that have changed and shifted for us, not the least of which is a new studio, actually 2 new studios now instead of just 1, and a new home and getting used to a new life. So there are so many changes that we are making right now. I'm not sure that I would want any others, even if I had a magic wand. But if you force me into it, I think that I would simplify my business a little bit. We do multiple things for our clients right now. We produce events for our clients. We consult on events. And then we also host our own event and have a coaching program where we teach others how to produce their own events. Those that, can't necessarily afford us to produce it for them, there's still a formula and a structure that produces successful events. So we teach others what that is. And then we also have a software business that we didn't have pre-pandemic that is a platform for virtual events called Obvio. And if I could narrow it down, like if I could do one thing, it would be to simplify. I would probably eliminate, at least one of those arms of the business. And not that I don't love producing events for people, but I would probably significantly reduce the amount of events that we personally produce, and our team have be the people who actually produce that a little bit more. We have 10 team members right now, but have a couple more, and simplify my life and Barry's life a little bit.
Definitely.
And that's counterintuitive, by the way. Just Lori, because one of the things I just said was hire more people to simplify my life. And most entrepreneurs would be like, that's not simplification. But it actually is if you think.
It is. It's simplification through delegation. So no, it is. I truly understand. Yes, hiring more people. It sounds like it's more to do, but it's not. It means you're actually having the ability to delegate more out and get those things off the plate. So I understand wholly you are looking to simplify. Not shocked at all. You guys have your hands in quite a bit and you're doing quite a bit. I congratulate you on all of the progress that you guys have made and all of the changes that you're amidst throughout the pandemic and the growth of the practice. So, and I thank you for sharing your journey with us. Please share the best way for our viewers to find you.
Well, thanks, Lori. I think that the best way for people to find us and to learn more about what we do is to join us at one of our events. We have one coming up this spring. The event is called The Virtual Event on Virtual Events, which, as you can imagine, is where we teach people how to produce virtual events. Yeah, it is. Maybe we should be better marketers, perhaps, and come up with a better name. But it does say exactly what it does. And we have an event coming up this spring. You can head on over to sagehub.com and register for that event. It's $197 to join us for 3 full days of amazing content to learn how you can produce a live event in your business and have it be a game changer for you, right? Because live events as revenue generating opportunities can really be game changing, or more specifically, life changing events for people. And it's a pretty awesome opportunity to be able to do this virtually now. I often say virtual events are the democratization of live events, because in-person events, you used to have to sign a big hotel contract. You used to have to spend lots of money on audio visual. You used to have to, have a room block, food and beverage, all of the things, right? And generally speaking, they were reserved for the wildly risky or the already successful. And with virtual, now really all you need is a laptop and a television. And you can host a virtual event for, 5, 50, or 500 people or more from the comfort of your living room with very, very little tech to move forward and have an amazing experience. So I'd say come join us for one of our events to learn how you can do that by going to sagehub.com.
sagehub.com. You are preaching to the choir. You don't know this, Blue, but the original title of this show was called Technology Equals Equality, because that's truly what I feel like it does. It has created the opportunity, that equalizer for anyone who has a mobile device to go ahead and begin a business, host a live event, create connections, and grow more so than we've ever been able to in all of history, realistically. But that's way too long of a web address to tell people to type anywhere. Had to get it. Had to get over it. I was married to the name, but I had to get over it. It was the purpose of the show, but it truly does. Technology equals equality. And I thank you so much for pointing that little piece out. But sagehub.com, I will be sure to include the link to that on the show notes page. Blue, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me, Lori. This has been a wonderful break in the middle of my day to be able to talk about this stuff. And I love the questions that you asked, things that I haven't thought about in quite some time. And it was nice to go down that lane.
I'm glad you enjoyed, and I enjoyed